Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys. So sit back and enjoy. And so today we're going to be talking about the dueling halftime shows of the Super Bowl as a big cultural war moment. We've got a lot of other things to talk about. I mean, Super Bowl was last night, so I think that's the most topical thing. The other thing we're going to get into is the outrage over Trump's completely not racist Obama monkey video. I don't know where people even saw the racism. I'm really tired of seeing the woke cancel culture try to re-emerge its head and see racism where there is none. So we'll be discussing that next, but we'll be discussing the Super Bowl first. I did not get any questions about this, surprisingly enough. I mean, people submitted today, a lot of people submitted two questions. I always try to emphasize like one question, but people were submitting a lot of two questions about historical topics and stuff. As a reminder, it's best to submit one question for the regular episode and two at most for the mailbag. Sometimes you could submit two, but for whatever reason, people did not relate them to any of the news topics that happened over the last week, but that's okay. So we're going to jump right into the halftime in my show, and my thoughts on it is that's what everyone is talking about right now. And that I actually watched the TPUSA one. We actually had a debate over at the party I was watching over how to have it. We did have two different TVs that people could choose which halftime show they wanted to do. They tried to argue for both TVs to be on Bad Bunny, but we were able to convince people to have one TV for the TPUSA one, and it was fine. I think it was professionally done. I think our audience would have liked it. Our voters would have enjoyed it. It's all country music, and then the one a ball with a ball, terrible, terrible Kid Rock new metal song for the late 90s, but that's okay. We had it anyway. Our audience loves new metal, unfortunately, but it was fine. I didn't think, and the artists that they got were big names in country music. This wasn't a completely half-rate thing. In terms of a visual experience, obviously the Bad Bunny one would have been more interesting to watch because it's got the more professional camera work. It's also got this whole setup and stage design that, the storyline, he's doing different things. Obviously, the Super Bowl halftime show is meant to be more of a visually arresting spectacle than this, which was, just a standard concert, which is put well done, and I think our audience would have enjoyed. So I thought it was fine. I'm not one of those people who thought it was embarrassing with it. And I also, with people who are complaining it's embarrassing, our whole side talks about heritage Americans. We're for heritage Americans. And then they're confronted with what actual heritage American culture is in 2026, what heritage Americans like. And then they're like, this is cornball. I don't like this. Where's the real heritage American culture? It's like, what do you imagine a real heritage American culture is? If it's not this. This is all country singers, fully Anglo-Saxon. Yeah, they have rap elements. Guess what? These people like rap, unfortunately, but that's it. So I thought it was fine. And it was an interesting, contrast that you have this entirely white country show as the alternative to the Bad Bunny pan-Hispanicism that we were witnessing on the halftime show. And it's all in, talking about Puerto Rico. Obviously, no one understood the language. And I actually am sick of people who are trying to argue for it being good. Like, it is, for example, or not example, but I would say that it's interesting to watch as a type of cultural artifact. But is it good? Is it something like, wow, I enjoy this? No. Look at the weird dancing styles. The fact is, the singing is terrible, or the rapping is like, hey, Puerto Rico, hey. That's pretty much the whole music. As I said, for most Latin music, it reminds me of when you hand a toddler some toy instrument, and then they choose to hit the same note, the most annoying note, repeatedly. That is Latin music. It is all basically handing a toddler toy instruments and then deciding to make music, and then they love it. It is designed for maximum annoyance and, and just like noise pollution. It is extremely annoying. And the whole thing is like highlighting Puerto Rico's history and the development over time of what it is. And it's obviously meant to, there was no obvious political statements. There's no ice out or anything of that sort, but it is clearly political in the time it's happening. Immigration is one of the great issues facing us today. The main targets of immigration raids are Hispanics. A lot of this arguments over is whether we want to decide that we are a multicultural state, that we love Latin culture and people speaking Spanish and all that, or we're going to continue to emphasize an Anglo-centered culture, which was what was represented by the TPUSA halftime show. And that was the conflict that you could see. And here, this is America. We don't need to learn how to speak Spanish. I think actually, as it's your patriotic duty, unless you for some reason enjoy Spanish, I'm not one of those people. I know that there's people who like the literature, the Spanish literature or something. Maybe you're one of those types. That's fine. But as Americans, we are not required to learn Spanish. I think it's almost our patriotic duty to not learn Spanish. I think it's great to learn other languages. We should emphasize that more, but we should refuse to learn Spanish because it's like our country. They need to learn English. And the fact is the vast majority of Americans didn't understand a word. And even what they did, it's like they all like Puerto Rico, ay, ay, ay. He says "ay" everything, every time, after every word. So, no one's understanding that. And there's like just weird dancing and stuff. They did show one clip as like two guys grinding on each other, which was unnoticed. But people were saying that's awesome because one, he's patriotic. He says, God bless America. And then what he meant by God bless America is every single country in the Americas, because he then goes and lists them all. And the United States, it goes from south to north. And guess one of the last states is United States, Canada. Then whatever he made a whole big notion of Puerto Rico, which, I've been told that Puerto Rico is the heartland of America. It is truly American, unlike anything you would have seen at TPUSA halftime show. So I was curious as to why he included Puerto Rico as a separate state. I thought it's a part of America. I thought it is America. It's the real American, all-American halftime show, as the Democrats were claiming. But apparently, it's a separate country, according to Bad Bunny. So, that was... that's an interesting note. But, the whole thing was about Puerto Rico. And most of the time, he was throwing around the Puerto Rican flag, not the American flag. And then all these people, wanting to find something, they're like, oh, he said God bless America, but what he meant is like the entirety of the Americas, which is fundamentally anti-US. He also doesn't call America. He calls us the United States, which they all like to do in Latin America, that we're not the real America. So instead of it being a patriotic America first message, which all these morons and a bunch of conservatives are trying to claim, it's actually deeply anti-American and subversive. So that's one element. Then he's throwing around the Puerto Rican flag, which they all ignored. And then they're like, well, it highlighted a straight marriage. Yeah, a huge victory in the culture war. We have a heterosexual couple make out on live TV. It's like, wow, we have won. We have finally won. This is a huge vibe shift that we now have a straight marriage depicted on TV. I'm like, it's pro-marriage. I can't believe people were even claiming that. It's like, who cares that it's a marriage? That doesn't matter. And then it's not like somebody's like, wow, I was thinking about not being married, then I saw Bad Bunny celebrate it. No. That was dumb. It's also just the terrible music, and it is meant to be an insult to Americans in a way that all the advocates and admirers, from John Kasich, John Potter, John Potter. I always get him confused with his dad, who he lives off of, and others who are like, this is awesome, this is true America. And then, they didn't understand a single word. Or the best is John Mellencamp. He's like, I didn't understand a single word of it, but I knew he stood with Puerto Rico, and that was enough. And it's like, why did you need to do that? And he has all the, it's all this messaging around it. And Even the football players didn't even like it. It's like they did interview all the NFL players, and none of them could name a Bad Bunny song except for the one he did with Cardi B. And there was one white guy, I think he was a Seahawks player, I forget, who made sure he learned the songs because he was like, I know I'm going to get asked about this, so I'm going to be prepared. And he like listed them, and it was like his top 3 Spotify hits, and he was so proud of himself for learning this. But every other player was like, oh man, I don't know, even know a Bad Bunny song. They didn't even bother caring to learn about his music. So, and the average American does not listen to Bad Bunny. The only people who listen to it are Hispanics. It's an artist that most people didn't know, and people are very confused. And it is like insulting because it is entirely in Spanish. We do speak English here. People like to say that's parochial, that's stupid, that's backwards. But no, we speak English. We want our artists to be in a language we understand, and then to have this whole halftime show that is one undermining American identity by claiming that a real American identity, Americanness is about patriotism, is about being pro every Latin American country, which is not the case. And all of that is, that's not something that we're going to be like. And the fact that none of us can understand this, and it's not music that any of us listen to. Even the football players don't listen to it. Now, what they want to listen to is that they were listening to Kendrick Lamar, which was terrible. I mean, in terms of like a spectacle, this was better than Kendrick Lamar. I mean, Kendrick Lamar just felt like an anachronistic some show that should have been in like 2021 at peak woke and peak BLM stuff. It didn't make any sense in 2025, and it was just bad to watch. There was like nothing there, and no one really knew the songs. He was just mumbling the whole time. There was no strong visual element to it. It was really bad. This is actually, it's interesting to watch, but it's very aggravating to watch, and I think it's very subversive to you, and it's almost carries an argument for Anglo-Protestant culture, which for all the problems of our corniness of the TPUSA halftime show, it was far better. It's something that is like, wow, this is nice, this is America, it's all white, music is okay, it's good. And if you really hated the TPUSA thing, maybe, yeah, of course it's going to be cheesy, that's what our people like. If you're really that angry about it, it's like you're not truly a right-winger, or at least an American right-winger. And you actually hate heritage American culture. I mean, this is what they're into, whether we like it or not. Like, what do you think they're going to be listening to? I don't know what people imagine real heritage American culture is, if it's not this, made music by, Scots Irish. So, that's my thoughts on it. I mean, there are some other interesting points about it. There is the fact that we felt the need for alternative halftime show is part of this element of dissenting Americanism that I think is becoming more of a part of the American right, is that we feel that we're different from the mainstream, and thus we need our own culture, media products from it, and that there's a feeling there's a profound gap from between the mainstream and what we prefer. Now, what is on highlight at the TPUSA thing was mainstream country music that is listened to by millions of people. So it's not like a totally fringe subculture thing, like what you see on the internet with people wanting monarchy and stuff. This is something that is enjoyed by a lot of people. And it wouldn't be out of place to have as a halftime show, but the fact that the halftime show had the Bad Bunny thing, and then instead of engaging with it, we then decided to do our own thing, which now with the internet and other things, you could have watched the Bad Bunny show on your own, which I did. I mean, afterwards I watched it, the full 13-minute performance to understand what it was like. But, in another time and place, if you had switched off the halftime show and then gone to, an alternative product, you would have missed out on it. And you would have maybe seen clips of it from the nightly news or the news afterwards, but that would have been your only interaction with it. But now, thanks to the internet, you experience it in whole, but you are still taking yourself out of what the majority of Americans are watching with that. And so that is an interesting element that, conservatives have felt the need to have this type of their own kind of counterculture to what's going on in the mainstream. Now, there's a couple different elements. There's the counterculture favored by the online right that's shared by very few people. Then there's the one that's favored more by the MAGA base, which is something that was represented at the TPUSA halftime show. But that is a more of a case that we feel more in conflict, or it's much more a part of mainstream conservatism to be at war with the mainstream culture. We've always had culture war elements and this type of stuff, but we really feel the need to provide our own culture media in a way that we didn't in the past. I've written about this too. I wrote about it in my article in the Kennedy Center last week. But and sometimes it doesn't really work out because we don't have much of the audience. What the audience wants is not high culture or whatever the online right prefers. It's something like the TPUSA halftime show, and I thought it was decent. It could have been a lot worse. I thought it was fine. I certainly enjoyed the music much more than at the Bad Bunny thing, which I thought was terrible. But final thoughts on it. I mean, if you're a conservative and you're loving this, you thought the Bad Bunny thing was great. No, it is not. It was not great whatsoever. And the thing is, people are saying it's like, well, conservatives are going to lose Hispanics by shitting on Bad Bunny, which maybe it's the case. This Bad Bunny is like their artist. It's like their most popular artist. They love Bad Bunny. It's why, he is the most streamed artist, one of the most streamed artists in the world. And it's even in Europe, he's big, which I don't understand. I once saw a chart where he's the number one streaming artist in Switzerland, which I don't get whatsoever, but that is the case. And it's certainly the biggest throughout the Spanish-speaking world. So this is a way for the NFL. I mean, the reason why the NFL picked him is that they're wanting to expand their market reach. And they realize that this is a huge artist in Latin America, and that the fact that they're going to have a halftime show, this is going to prompt people, Latin Americans, and, people, I think he has some popularity in Spain, and, to tune into the Super Bowl, and then they could be hooked on as consumers, as fans. So it makes sense as a corporate strategy, and NFL is obviously a business, so they're going to do that. It also created controversy and made people talk about the halftime show, and people are going to tune in to see what everyone is talking about. So, it was, as a business decision, I can understand, but as a decision in itself, I oppose. Clearly, he has been attacking the show and saying I dislike it. But it is dumb for that to apply to Republican politics. Yes, if everything is just about getting as most voters possible, you'd want like Republicans to go like, we love the Latino culture. We love Bad Bunny. And then they pretend that they know the songs. And it's like, this has been so wonderful. Oh, we love this patriotism. He included American flag. Wow. Wow. An American flag there. Oh my God. This is the real America First Patriot, which was some of these idiots were claiming. You could imagine that. Obviously, Trump is thankfully not taking that stand and saying it was one of the worst halftime shows of all time. But I think it's important to take a stand and principle stand and say, like, we don't want this as our culture. And, you're going to have Hispanics here, obviously. For certain right-wing groups, they need Hispanics. Like, it seems most of the growth of white nationalism is coming from Hispanics. Maybe a lot of Puerto Ricans as well, but, they're going to be there. But I don't think we should celebrate this culture. Like, this stuff is very aggravating. And it's like, when you go out on the street and you hear, like, a car blasting the reggaeton, the stupid beat that they have in every song and all that. And, it's not our culture. And I think it is important for the right to take a stand and not to imagine that this is all just some rational political calculation about how to achieve more voters. I think it's necessary to say, like, no, we don't like this. We want to celebrate a different type of culture. And for, maybe the cheesiness or corniness of the alternative, it was far better. And that is my take on that. But it is now that all the halftime shows now have dueling culture war elements. And I can imagine that next year for that Super Bowl that there will be an artist that Jay-Z selects, because Jay-Z is going to be running the halftime show for the rest of the decade, I think, under his contract. He's likely going to pick an artist that is not, we're not going to like. Most like, I could imagine that they're going to be like, oh, you guys want country? Well, Beyonce put out a country album. I have a strong suspicion that it will be Beyonce next year. And she's already performed the Super Bowl, but you know, it's Jay-Z's a run. And this is gonna be like, oh well, we're gonna have a country artist now, and it's gonna be, her wearing country as a skin suit in songs that are not really country, but they have like a little bit of a twang to them. But I imagine that this is gonna be going for what it is. But the NFL, I mean, people are going to watch the game. Actually, to the last point I need to make about the NFL, man, there were so many viral posts about this being goy ball and zog ball and stuff. And people are just getting really angry about people watching the Super Bowl. And I mean, I used to have the no NFL pledge. I mean, people got extremely mad about that when I had it there. But if I had done the no NFL pledge now, because we now have a little bit different demographics than when I when I made it in 2022. When I did that in 2022, man, people were really fucking mad that I would even suggest that no NFL. I mean, in some ways they're right, but they were, these guys acted like this was revolting against the modern world by it. But now that you have like a more angrier element, also that you see a lot of these guys are foreigners who don't watch football in the first place, and everything is zog ball and goy ball. They're now more into it. And these posts, it's like, dude, if this is like our message to the country, like no one's going to be into this. But it is funny that like half our side is always like, we represent the mainstream. Meanwhile, kill all zog watchers. Like, you are not going to go up to any person in real life and say this shit. And as part of with like the NFL, like I'm pro bread and circuses. I wrote an article last year. It's like people are going to have their mindless entertainment. There are far worse options than goy ball, as some people were saying, or the sports ball. It's fine for people to get into it. It's mindless entertainment. No one pays attention to the end racism and these stupid ads that they have. So it's whatever. It's entertainment. I do think there's still a curious element of guys with NFL teams in their bios being the most like aggressively or normie people with their politics and like the most aggressive libtards. But the average person's watching NFL. People need their entertainment. And I think when we took away the bread and circuses in 2020 due to COVID lockdowns, what did the people do? Did they overthrow the government to bring back the Habsburgs? No, they went crazy. They adopted BLM. Were burning cities on behalf of George Floyd. So it's better that these normies are watching the game than getting involved in left-wing politics, which is what would happen if we took away the game. It's not that they're now going to suddenly decide that we need to end democracy. We need to have a racial monarchy as our system. They're going to reenact what happened in 2020. And you also could see that the greater hyperpolitization of the people in the 2010s coincided with people paying with declining sports viewership. Unfortunately, with the sports betting apps, it boosted, but there is a silver lining that people are focusing on that rather than left-wing politics and trying to riot over George Floyd. That's my take on that. So I just wanted to throw that out there on the Super Bowl. Now, K-Max has a question about the ads, and I think you guys need to be prepared for this take. I have not heard this take before, so your brains might explode when you hear K-Max's take on this. He asks, which Super Bowl commercial did you see as most interesting or most woke? I say Robert Kraft's Stop Anti-Semitism one, in which a black guy named Tyrone, I don't think he's named Tyrone, protects a Jewish kid from bullying from the white kids while saying, I understand bullying your view. I was like, whoa, I can't believe he found that the woke ad. And then he had a ironic side note. I don't think it's a proper use of ironic, but he said, I thought Robert Kraft was a Trump friendly or a Trump supporter, but this ad makes him seem anti-white for sure. Wow, this is I hope you guys are sitting down because you might have just been blown away by this view. Is that very few people were noticing the Robert Kraft anti-Semitism ad on the internet. So I bet a lot of people didn't understand these intricacies, but thankfully K-Max is here to say it. I think the thing about that ad is that everyone thought it sucked, so it wasn't even that harmful. I mean, it was like everyone hated that ad. Everyone hated it. Is that it had a corny messaging. It was poorly done. Also the fact that like it's like really overt with the black kid as being the one guy there. Everyone hated the ad. A lot of Jews were upset. It was like actually the ad should have been that the kid beats the crap out of the one who put the dirty Jew thing on his backpack. Like everyone seemed to hate the ad. So I don't even think it's, you know, that most woke, or it probably is the most woke ad. Even though I think even the woke hates it because they view this stuff as, right wing Zionist of some sort, which that would be Robert Kraft. I mean, Robert Kraft he's supported both Democrats and Republicans, but he has a personal friendship with Trump, and he's likely going to he donated to Trump in 2024, I believe, and then might continue to support Republicans in 2028. I don't know. It's not, with the anti-white angle, a lot of people, it's not, like the average viewer isn't going to understand what race those kids are that it's slapping on. And I think even when they did slow down to AI, like one of them looked Hispanic. So, and that's not going to really register with people. I mean, it is saying that like the real thing that they have to worry about from anti-Semitism is white kids, which half the right would think that's awesome because that's and how they view things, which in fact it's mostly coming from non-whites and other minorities, or not non most minorities are non-white, but it's mostly coming from minorities, particularly Muslims and others. So it's a complete inaccurate thing, and also it's unlikely that the black kid would try to stand up. And it is like a really ham-fisted message of like, oh yeah, I experience anti-black racism just like you experience anti-Semitism. We're one and the same. And, everyone is rolling their eyes at this. So the intended message was very woke, but I don't think it actually worked. The other ad that people got really upset about was the Redfin ad, which people on right wing, it's once again these dumb ads where it's like the noble non-whites and the kind of arrogant or less supportive whites, because what happens in the ad is that the whites have to turn to help for the non-whites as neighbors. Now, one of the white characters, this young girl, is trying to be a friendly neighbor, but people aren't really helping her out until she needs to find her dog, and then they help her out and find the dog. But she's not like a villain. I guess there's an older white guy who refuses to say hi to his Hispanic neighbor, and then the Hispanic neighbor clears trees off his lawn, and like, wow, that's nice. And so it's like standard ads where it's like dumb white people and noble non-whites. But people were like, this is like messaging for a genocide. I was like, I don't. The messaging is not that the Hispanic is using the chainsaw on the old man. It's actually like, oh, you should actually clear his lawn even if he's a racist Trump supporter, which, it's not the type of message we'd want. But it's not as... I would not say it's incredibly anti-white, because I mean the girl is trying to make friends with her non-white neighbors, and then they aren't friends with her. But then they eventually realize, oh, she needs to find her dog, and we'll help her find her dog. So I don't think it's completely anti-white, but it does reflect how ads depict racial relations, and so that's it. But the things that's like, this is Radio Rwanda stuff. I don't think the Hutus were saying like, you need to clear, the Tutsis are not going to say hi to you, but you need to clear trees off their lawn anyway. But this is code for genocide. I don't think that was it. But people always love to post that stuff because it gets the highest engagement and they get higher payouts. So that's it. But I think with the main one is obviously the Stop Anti-Semitism ad. I didn't really pay attention to most of them. A lot of them were just, a lot of stuff feels very AI-ish and very inauthentic and just weird. Like there's a Jurassic Park ad where they use de-aging. It was weird. Even the one with the Dunkin' Donuts ad where I think they were using some AI and de-aging in that. And it had a lot of the 90s sitcom characters alongside Ben Affleck. This just felt very weird and inauthentic and very AI-ish. And so I think they were just in general pretty bad. So that is my thoughts on that. So now we'll go to the questions about Trump's Truth Social post, which some people are finding racist. New England refugee asked about this, and who else? Oh, Silly Billy asked about this. And so Silly Billy actually asked the question: is that doing the refugees like? What shouldn't you just wanted me to talk about it? And then Silly Billy asked, "Do you think this will exhaust the remaining political capital that Black people can leverage on issues of racism?" No, no. It's actually an indication of the opposite, as he says. Will it finally end, or will be discussing racism against Black people forever? No, it's like the opposite, man. This is, he said so many things about immigrants that it's wild. Like, Somalis are garbage, and he's what he said about Haitians and a lot of other groups, which are Black, but they're not MBAs. They're not Native Black Americans, and he's attacking them as immigrant foreign groups. And he's really pushed the limit, and he's pushed the limit on Muslims and a lot of other groups and Hispanics. But once he is faced with something that's dear to Native Black Americans, which Native born Black Americans will emphasize that, hey, we are not Haitians, we are not Somalis. And so when he's faced with that, he has to do the closest thing to an apology he has. I don't think I've ever seen him. The only times I've ever seen him backtrack for something like this was the grab him by the pussy, the Access Hollywood tape, and the immediate fallout after January 6th. And then this is like his three controversies: is the Obama, depicting the Obamas as apes, which I love the defenses of it. Like, that it's like it's not racist at all. It's from a Lion King clip, Beam video, and it's like the people point out, I was like, there aren't any gorillas in Lion King, and everybody else is like, well, Hakeem Jeffries is a meerkat, so that's not racist, and also Biden is also a monkey too, and I fully supported that defense. I don't think there was anything racism at all. But, people, this is one thing, like, you can say a lot. I think Trump has advanced, like, the rhetoric on immigrants, and I think we're able to say things about immigrant groups and a lot of other groups that we wouldn't have been able to say a few years ago, and even stuff about trans people and other things. But it's like, this remains the one great taboo. Even more so than, like, even there's something that I think there is maybe more cancellation for, or equal amounts of cancellation for anti-Semitism, but people are really engaging that stuff, and a very prominent individuals are doing that as well, and what they're saying, both conservatives and broadcasters and that sort. But when it comes to Blacks, you don't go there, and I think it's still very strong a part of our culture. And this wasn't breaking down the resistance. It reaffirmed the resistance towards it. And even a lot of right wingers who, once again, they're always saying, like, strong, we need to take a strong stance on everything. And they even winced at this, because if you grow up in society, you're known to not do this. And it's always seen as a major, major social faux pas, or major violation of a social taboo to do so. And I think we witnessed that with the backlash towards it. That the fact that there were so many Republicans wanting to come out to say, we oppose this, we reject this, Trump needs to apologize for this. And that's it. It's also showing that a lot of the mainstream established Republicans are trying to break free from Trump, which he had a strong grasp on the party in 2025, but a lot of them are getting cold feet about the ICE raids and other things that are going on, and this presented them an opportunity to set themselves apart from Trump. And so I think it just reaffirms the social taboo around racial caricatures around Blacks, is that you can do that with a lot of other groups. And even what, like, Dinesh D'Souza was, like, these AI videos he was doing with Somalis, but the fact that they're not MBAs, you're allowed to criticize them in ways you wouldn't be able to do with Blacks. It's still very strong with us, and I think it's most Americans go along with that. I don't think it's not a change. So those are my thoughts on it. It is funny that this is, like, one of the main I don't want to call it failures, but main controversies of the Trump administration is him doing something. And I have to admit, like, I think it's a wise decision for Trump to do? Obviously not. But in terms of just like a humor element, as a comedy element, I was just like, it's kind of like a ridiculous thing. It's like, what is going on in the world? it's just funny that it's like the president of the United States tweeting it. It's like such an absurd moment that you just have to laugh. And all Friday when he tweeted it, I would just like burst out laughing at the thought that this is like what our president of the United States just did. And obviously people were like, it's not racist at all, which even made it funnier. And the arguments of it. I mean, it's clearly an error because he had it was some like really boring like video explaining how the 2020 election was stolen, which is like, what is Trump? You know, Trump, you're the president right now. Why are you tweeting out this stuff in 2026? But I mean, he is having his admin look into it. But there's that, and then it has like somebody forgot to edit out that it was doing some type of playback, and then it got included in it. So it was a mistake, but. Yeah, the fact that this is one of his main controversies indicates how strong of a taboo there is around this compared to any other forms of bigotry that there are in our society. So there's that. Let's see. There's a lot of questions about Gene Wu, who's a Texas state representative. K-Max sent a question about this, saying, my question on this front is, can they, as in non-whites, unite? His view that Asians, Hispanics, and blacks can unify against whites and make that a political movement. I think there are too many divisions among this group. And then I think Gillis and Joyer asked it. He said that clip from Gene Wu that has gone viral is probably the most brazenly anti-white thing said. And what Gene Wu said was, non-whites share the same oppressor, and we are the majority now. We can take over this country. And he is a Texas state representative, not a United States not at the federal level. And he said, and Gilson George says that this is the most brazenly anti-white thing said by an elected Democratic politician that I can remember. There have been veiled comments, but this was openly advocating for demographic conflict. I remember Hanania saying back in the Sander days that white identitarianism would only become mainstream if we had anti-white politics perpetually at the level of the summer of 2020. So if rhetoric like Wu's comments become more common, what impact do you foresee it having on the country? I think Democrats are probably going to say that's too far because they don't want to go back to that 2020. They're still feel that way because some of their minority politicians will say this stuff, or they'll go off on whites still. Even their white liberals will say this stuff, but they do know it's bad politics to go back. They want to have they're bringing back the abolish ICE stuff and going full pro-immigrant as we can. And that's why they love the Bad Bunny thing. It's like, we want this as our culture. This is so much better than the boring culture promoted by country artists. So this is what they want. But at the same time, they have to keep the anti-white racism in check. They know that was very unpopular to say, and they were all saying this type of stuff. They know it's not good politics to say our country was founded on white supremacy, which is what Biden's black UN ambassador to the UN was saying. It was even what Biden was saying at times, and some other people. They know that that's too much. But they still minority candidates will say this. With Hanani's point that, yes, if you had it perpetually at the level of summer 2020 and you just had nonstop berating of whites in the way that we thought with the Redfin ad. Like the Redfin ad, it would be like, be a good neighbor, and it'd be like the Hispanic, like he doesn't get a high from the evil white racist who then calls him a slur, and then he shoots him to death. That would be the how Radio Rwanda version of that ad. If we were having ads like that, if we were having, there are movies like this that are away, but they try to say that the whites can be included in the struggle, like one battle after another. And Democrats realize that they are making inroads with white suburbanites. So they don't want to scare them off by saying, like, you're not part of our coalition, you are the enemy, which a number of like very brainwashed ones will be like, nod their heads, and that's so true, or I'm a good white. But most whites are not going to want to hear about how evil they are and they need to apologize for slavery all the time. It's going to make them turn to the right. So they know they don't want to scare them off, but they still have politicians saying this. Now, Gene Wu isn't that important of a politician. I think K-Max called him a prominent Democrat. I would not call him a prominent Democrat. I mean, within Texas politics, but not within national politics. But Jasmine Crockett is a prominent Democratic national politician, and she says many of the same things, like blaming whites for all the crimes and murders and being more violent than everyone else. She makes a lot of anti-white comments. And so a lot of the dumber Democrats can't do this. And so they still highlight this message. Now, Wu had an interesting way because he said that all non-whites should band together against whites. We're the majority and we can strike back against them. And this was a huge concern for a lot of right-wingers back in the day. I mean, because they thought that what would happen is that there would be a type of universal rainbow coalition of non-whites who would have a strong identity as being non-white, and that would create enough solidarity between them, and then they would unite against whites, and that they would follow the model of blacks and black identity in this country. But as we're seeing with Asians and Hispanics, they're following a different path. Hispanics, a lot of these groups have more hostility towards blacks than they do towards whites. This is especially true with Hispanics. And they are not willing to just, because they're non-white, just to sign up and vote for liberal politics or liberal politicians and liberal policies. Is that they are much more complicated than we would have imagined. And so in terms of a united front against whites, is that there's too many divisions, as K-Max does point out, there are too many divisions between them, is that there's not a real shared sense of solidarity simply because they're non-white. And a lot of them, especially the immigrants, want to marry whites and have white spouses. And so it doesn't really work to have a fully united non-white nationalism when a bunch of these people are married to whites and that their children are adopting a version of whiteness. So I don't think it's really going to work out. In terms of that uniting, I think we had a lot of fears around that in the alt-right, or not fears, but we thought that this prediction. But I think as we're seeing in the 2020s is that something else is emerging that is not going to be this rainbow coalition of anti-whiteness, of all the non-whites pitting against whites. It's going to be a much more complicated picture. And so Gene Wu wants that to happen because he thinks that, as our country becomes more non-white, that's going to favor Democrats. And it probably will. But it's not going to be in the same picture that he imagines it as. And a lot of these people are going to be, as we saw in the last presidential election, are moving more Republican. Now, we're probably not going to have 46% Hispanic support in 2026. We're likely that's going to fall below 40%, might even be below 35%. It'll still be over 30%. It should be at least over 30%, but we'll see. And we'll probably get over at least a third of Asians again. But in order for that to happen, you need all these groups voting for Democrats at the same rate that blacks vote for Democrats, which isn't even really working, which isn't really the case. So I think what Gene Wu's desire for them to all unite against whites, I don't think that's actually going to happen. It would be better, as I think for Hanani's point, that would create a type of white identity politics that's much more explicit than I think what MAGA and America First is. But I'm more doubtful that that's going to be the case. Democrats don't want to revive. They don't want to revive all of them. It's peak woke. They still are going to have the anti-whiteness because they can't help themselves, but they don't want to go fully into it. And it's also, you're not going to see their more mainstream politicians really echo it. They do realize that what Gene Wu and what Jasmine Crockett says hurts them at the polls, and they want to win over more of those white suburbanites. But they'll have other problems with that, not just with anti-whiteness, but with adopting like full-on socialism that's going to tax and take away the homes of the white middle class. But that is a separate topic. So we'll go with Dollar Bill. He's got two questions. He said, are European right-wingers just liberals who want to restrict immigration? I suspect many AfD and nationality voters were and are huge Obama fans. I don't think so. I don't think they're liberals. I think they just have different interests than us. And they also, a lot of their news and information comes from liberal sources. And I think a lot of them are just inherently anti-American. I think it's not that they're more liberals. I think it's just that they're have different interests than us. And it's very hard to create this type of, I think what we're seeing now is in the differences between Europe and America, it's very hard to kind of create that, or not kind of, it is hard. It is very hard to create the type of pan-whiteness that a lot of people in the alt-right wanted, because in Europe they don't want that. And they still have their big ethno-cultural divisions between the countries. they're not. Europe is not really united even among right wingers. Germans. You'll talk to Germans and they'll say how much they hate the French. The Poles. You'll talk to the Poles. Talk to how much they hate the Germans, and obviously they hate the Russians. I mean, I guess one common hostility is towards Russians is that most of them don't like Russians. And historically, actually, if you guys listen to my What is the West podcast, historically, Russia was excluded from the West and was seen as the common enemy of Europe. But I don't think they're liberals. I think that they're just different interests from us. And people will be like, well, they're more pro-abortion. Well, so are a lot of our voters, as we've seen. Or even gay marriage and stuff. So are a lot of our voters. They're changed. I think that there's much more of a secular element in the nationalist parties, but I don't know if that would make them more liberal. Probably for Americans, they would suspect that of that, but I don't think that they're liberals who just want to restrict immigration. A lot of the MAGA base are liberals who just want to restrict immigration, which I'm fine with. I think in some ways that might be better than the alternatives, where it's like conservatives who then decide they want more immigration to have a more traditional society or something, or to reject liberalism of some sort, classical liberalism. So that's that. The second question is, during your fraternity days, were you ever on doorman duty when the fraternity was throwing a house party? You'd have to refuse admittance to friendless nerds and other undesirables. Yeah. I don't know. There's not a follow-up. So yes, that's you restricted access to your parties. So yeah, we did that. That was a case for all fraternities. If you ever it's always bad to let random dudes in. You'd let women in, but it was always bad to let random dudes in, because you'd like, who are these people? You don't know what alcohol they're bringing, and then you're responsible for them, and there could be creeps, and also they're just they're not in the fraternity. It's like part of the reason is that the member benefits is that you're in here, so you're allowed to go to the parties. I mean, you'd allow people that other people knew, like from other fraternities, or a handful of GDIs, but just allowing randos in, that's rando dudes, that's like terrible. It's like, who do you know? And if you don't know anybody, why the fuck are you here? But yes, exclusion is necessary in that case. Who else we've got? We'll go with Gillis and Joyer's other question. He said, in your IQ supplement on the Nation of Islam, you mentioned that old school black nationalism was different from modern black identity politics, and that the former is revolutionary while the latter mostly wants to preserve the status quo. Given that the left is now more primarily focused on illegal immigrants, economic populism, and third worldism in general, do you think this is setting up a cultural and political clash with a black voting bloc, or will they just go along with it if it hurts whites? No, it is setting up a political clash with black voting bloc, because their primary interest is ensuring that their benefits are maintained. And they're mostly happy with the status quo. They just want more benefits from themselves. And the old school black nationalism wasn't so much revolutionary as that they were more into separatism, as that in Nation of Islam wanted to build up their own thing. They wanted to have their own grocery stores and their own businesses and all that. And today, modern black identity politics is just they want more welfare. That's it. They want more benefits set aside for themselves. And they've gotten mad that now that these sanctuary city policies mean that illegal immigrants are taking their benefits away. So they're not as eager for it. That doesn't mean they're going to vote Republican or become immigration restrictionists. Their sole goal is just that those benefits are preserved for themselves. And that's why they tend to vote for more establishment politicians compared to immigrants and others, because they know that those benefits will stay with themselves, but with more radical politicians, that those benefits will then be redistributed among other groups, particularly immigrants. So I don't think they're going to turn to be like the most moderate. I mean, they'll vote for whoever's the Democrat is. But you even saw that with Mamdani, is that he really struggled among blacks, but he did pretty well among immigrants and the white yuckies. So they'll still go along with the Democrats, but the eagerness is there. What they want is an establishment black politician with a degree of charisma who's not gay, and he promises them all they want. They would love a Jasmine Crockett figure who they don't mind if someone's anti-white. They just want to ensure that they're not seeing their benefits distributed to other groups. Ken's got some questions. Ken asked 2 questions. He's like, do you read a book a week? Yes. And in terms of IQ supplements, a lot of them are pre-recorded from weeks or months in advance because sometimes I'll just read a book and then it's like, oh, I'll do an IQ supplement on it, and then I'll save it, and then I'll save it up for time. So if I'm like traveling or doing something else, I have an IQ supplement there. So I read at least a book a week. Sometimes it's 2 books a week. Second question, now that the Minneapolis situation is wrapping up, is the left's energy going to fade away again, or are they going to find another 2010s-esque crisis to get hot and bothered about? That is the repoliticization here to stay? To a degree, yes, but I don't think normies are as subject to it. I think it's just that vibe shift that we witnessed last year is over. That it was like we felt like we were in the middle of like a Trumpian cultural moment. And I think that's disappeared. I think you can see that with the Super Bowl halftime show is like very explicitly, well, not explicitly, but it was clearly political. And then we're having to do our own Trumpian cultural moment, which is seen as the alternative culture or the counterculture rather than the mainstream culture. The fact that football players who did the Trump dance had to apologize this year, while last year none of them felt like apologizing. So you are seeing things. We're not returning to peak woke of 2010s. Well, we can't do that because the news media that was there to enforce cancel culture is far weaker. We're not having a return to cancel culture. Is that you can get away with saying a lot more things that you were not capable of getting away with back then. Also, the news media is not assigning like HuffPost reporters to figure out and dox like popular Twitter accounts. They can't even figure out who the DHS account is, and this is a government official. So you don't see the same level of cancel culture. There's people are more willing to get away with stuff, and right-wing views are more prevalent than they were then. But I do think there's much more of an aggressive style among the left, and I think the public is getting, or I don't want to say the general public, but there's more of a backlash building towards Trump than there was last year. So it is a degree of the repoliticization, but also a lot of normies are following news less. If we were a hyper-politicized moment, you'd be seeing media outlets hiring people rather than laying off hundreds. People aren't listening to the news. They're focusing on sports. They're focusing on their parlays. They're focused on video game news. They're focused on a lot of other things. So a lot of normies are just not as politicized, but the ones who are politicized are very polarized and very radicalized, especially on the right, more so than they were in the 2010s. And I think the left is moving back to where their radical position, their extreme Trump derangement syndrome, and embrace of woke ideals. I think that they've moved back to that, but the center has not. And on the other side, the right has gone in a more far more right-wing direction than it was in the 2010s. And so the people who are into politics are far more polarized than they've ever been, but the center is kind of doing its own thing. But there is a degree of backlash towards some of Trump's moves, whether, the Epstein stuff and the ICE shootings and stuff like that. So that's my take on that. And then Mark has 2 questions. Mark asks, thoughts on recent Helen Andrews' article about Asian grind, academic culture, and universities. Well, you're in luck because tomorrow's article is going to be about that. It's going to be about the Southern angle to it and how it presents an alternative to the grind culture. I'll add some other thoughts because there's the Southern angle. I have a whole article, so I'm not going to discuss that. So just be on the lookout for that tomorrow. But on the grind academic culture, I think there is a useful argument that we don't want Asians to be our entire elite class, but we're constrained into how we're supposed to limit it. Because when we had holistic admissions, liberal administrators would use that to then find ways to artificially boost diversity and figure out ways that they could say, we can tell that he's a diverse student. He's going to really add to the richness of this campus. Now that you're more insistent on tests and grades, that rewards those who are strivers, much are those who are studying for hours on end, more than that. I think the better term is not so much grind because it's, hard work is obviously going to be rewarded in this country. If you're willing to put, the hours in, you're going to be a successful person, and our society has always rewarded that. I don't know what people imagine is that like I'm not supposed to work hard. That's not Helen Andrews' point, but it's that I'm so creative and talented. I'm not. But I'm not. This isn't recognized with the standards that some of the right wingers who are really into this stuff. Because a lot of right wingers, I used to always use this thing that's like front row versus back row, which I thought was a useful way to visualize the differences between Trump supporting whites and liberal whites. Is that the liberal whites are generally the front row kids who did really well in school. They strive to do academic achievement, and then they went and to the Ivy Leagues and whatever. Meanwhile, the back row kids either went to went to trade school or maybe a not so good school, and they were into business and stuff. And it's not so much income level because so a lot of the back row kids, if they started their own business and made a lot of money, they making more than the front row kids. It's more just their paths in life. And I think that was a useful element in that. But I think a lot of the arguments that are made on front row versus back row are coming from back row nerds who were not the entrepreneurial types. They were just spending all their time playing video games in high school. And they're like, colleges should, because some of these people are like, colleges should get the top tier athletes who are really sociable. It's like, those are like athleticism and sociability are like even less common among the online right than Asians. So I don't think that's the case, but I think in some ways they want like your ability to play video games and make memes to be count more for higher education, which I don't think it would be. But if you wanted holistic admissions to maybe account for more creativity, that would reward another group we really don't like, which are the theater kids. So, it's a tough situation with what you want universities to do. I think the more meritocratic basis of the, it takes for greater account for test scores and grades is the best version. Yes, it will reward Asians, but the alternative is to continue with affirmative action, which I don't think we wanted, and it seems remarkably unfair with our commitment to merit. And for a lot of people who don't want to spend all their time studying and all that, there's other ways to find success in this society, that you can become a successful salesman and entrepreneur independent of all that, which is what a lot of these kids at SEC schools do. But I think the real problem is not so much grind. It's like striver culture where these guys scheme their ways in. And this is like what Indians are doing, because a lot of this imagines is like all East Asians, but East Asians and South Asians have subtle differences. And the South Asians are more scheming their way in by either adopting wokeness or some type of thing to get in, and they scheme their way into getting to these positions. And then when they have the society, it's not that they're just dutiful conformist worker bees, it's that they are actually, and also like the worker bees, completely risk averse, is that they're willing to take risks, they're willing to scheme, and they have a decent level of social skills to rise up in our society and become the new elite. So I don't know if that's taken into account. I generally support Helen Andrews going on this because it is an issue that needs to be raised, but also the backlash towards it shows that why very few people have this, because there's not much of the real argument is that we want an elite that looks like the rest of the country and not be a completely separate group. And we're really going to have that with Asians taking over it. So, and how to articulate the problems with it is difficult on a mainstream level, because then people are like, well, they're rewarded for merit and hard work. And what we imagine is that these dutiful, hardworking East Asians who are just working harder than everybody, and they deserve this more than others. And so we love merit in our society and being rewarded based on merit rather than other attributes. And so some people were able to criticize the Helen Andrews argument on that basis, but I think it is a concern worth expressing. But the backlash towards Andrews show a lot of people don't express it. So that is my thoughts on that. James has a question, or actually, hold on. Mark had another question. He said, I saw that you fought Pedro Gonzalez a few weeks ago. I then checked his Twitter feed to see what's up. And he's now straight up resist live, retweeting Bill Kristol. He's also a huge Luke Besson fan. Can you go off on him one final time? I've gone off on him enough, so maybe when I'm in an argument with him. But Yeah, he doesn't really have any politics. This is a lot of people who they adopt anti-Trumpism as their sole political guiding force, and with Pedro, it's anti-rightoidism as well. I think with Hanania, you can discern a coherent political philosophy. There is no coherent political philosophy with Pedro because up until very recently, he would still attack Trump for not being right wing enough and him failing to live up to his right wing goals. Now he's just gone into resistance liberalism, but he could instantly go back and start attacking Trump on right wing grounds. There's nothing really there. And he's kind of like a dumber Indian that he sucks up to people he thinks that will reward him, and then looks down on people who he thinks beneath him. But he's a Hispanic, so it doesn't really work out this way, and he has zero impulse control. But a lot of people support him. I think the real problem with Pedro is the people who enabled him to become a big thing, and a lot of these people who spent their whole time promoting Pedro Gonzalez in the 2020s. Now they want to say like, oh, we only promote good people and strong and independent people, and we're pro-Trump. And it's like, well, why were you spending years promoting Pedro Gonzalez? So, but he is what he is. I don't think it's leading into him having many writing opportunities, but I guess some of these liberals do retweet him now. So I guess that's a theory. But he is somebody who doesn't have enough talent or intelligence to write articles. It's if you're gonna with the limited amount of intelligence and talent he had, he was able to succeed in conservatism thanks to being Hispanic. And the fact he said a lot of things that a lot of these older guys wanted to say, but they wouldn't say because it was like, well, I'm worried I can't say this. So then they got a Hispanic guy to say this. Even though I was saying this long before Pedro, but I was a white guy who got canceled. So they needed to get a Hispanic replacement for me, and they got this moron. So that's all I have to say on Pedro at this time. I've gone off on him a lot. So James has a question. All right, he's got two questions. Have you read the article from Ross Douthat from New York Times saying that Trump lost the country? He also posted a long list of advice for Trump to fall. Many of these pre-Trump GOP types say they want the policies that he pushes, but still complain. Eric Erickson also come to mind. Thoughts? Yeah, it's not a surprise that Douthat says that. I mean, people have these memes. It's like Trump is over. I remember in the first term, Trump was having similar problems around this time, and people were like complaining about his approval rating. He was hovering around 40% for most of the first term, and if COVID hadn't happened, he was going to win 2020 in a landslide. A lot of people even say he wants 2020, but that's another matter. I think it's that people always want to write him off and then move on to their other thing. And this is coming from both the center, where people want a more traditional GOP. This is coming from the far right, who think that they're going to have a national socialist GOP, which I think the moderates have a more realistic outlook than the people who think we're going to have a fascist GOP to replace Trump. We're going to become anti-Trump, and then we're going to have some fascists rise up. That's just not going to happen. And a lot of people just don't like that because these people hated Trump when he came down the escalator. They never liked him. They hated his attitude. They hated his style. They hated his offensiveness and his racism or whatever. And now they said he's an insult to democracy. But then their whole fan base likes him, or their whole followers have liked him, so they've had to go along. But they've always wanted something different. But I've noticed is that a lot of these Never Trumper types is that some of the Never Trumper types are attacking him for being not right wing enough. Like Sean Davis comes to mind, because Sean Davis, he's now reinvented himself as like this huge hardcore right winger. But in 2016, he was a Never Trumper who was complaining about the alt-right and racism. And now, but a lot of those types who were Never Trumpers and they changed their politics and maybe they became more right-wing, they still don't like Trump. And so they're just kind of following their instincts from 2016. And it's now with different dressing. And I think that was a lot of the DeSantoids as well. But for the more traditional conservatives, they're the same. I mean, Eric Erickson was one of the prominent Never Trumpers, and Rod Dreher was also an anti-Trump guy. Never liked him, and I think if your instincts and disposition has always made you hate Trump, even if you've adopted different politics and maybe come to terms with the new right, you still don't like Trump. It's just you on an instinctual basis, and instincts generally are a better indication of how you're going to react to political events than your supposed ideology or theory. And that's also Ross Douthat was also anti-Trump for many years. Once it became normalized to like Trump, it's one of those signs of vibe shift is that Douthit became more pro-Trump. And last year he was mostly a pro-Trump writer, and then he's like, this is too much. I'm going back to being anti-Trump. So he says Trump lost the country. But Trump, in order to enact his policies, he had to do these things. He had to do the raids. He had to do the deportations. People, our side wants him to do these things. And by doing these things, he was going to create discomfort among a lot of the public. It's just what it is. So people always say he lost the country. Yes, there was that vibe shift that's over. But there's not one single event that really could have said. I think some of it's the clownishness. Some of it's trying to deliver things to the base that the base wanted that was maybe not smart. I think the Epstein thing could have been easily avoided. Epstein thing, this could have not been something they had to deal with, but the clowns promised that they're going to deliver it, and then when they saw it, they're like, oh, this isn't proving the Democrats are a satanic pedophile cabal. It doesn't exist, and then it's become a problem and lost them a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of the support, but has created problems for them within the online sphere and with the Rumble sphere. And but with the raids, they promised this and they're enacting it, and people are like, "Oh, I didn't realize that this was actually going to upset people." What do you expect? There's other problems with going on with Trump that might be an issue down the line, and a lot of people are like, "We need to get out from underneath Trump and create our separate way." It's like for people who are on the right, who online right, and nationalists and identitarians or whatever, our fortunes are tied to Trump. If he goes down, we go down with him. A lot of people think that that's not the case. No, that's the case because the GOP and conservatism, if they're going to find that Trumpism is a failure, they're not going to decide what the real problem is that we weren't radical enough. No, they're going to say that we're too radical, and that's what Douthit and that's what all these other people with a lot more power, influence, and money that we have are saying. And it's not that you're going to somehow have a magical, perfect candidate, which there's no such thing, is going to emerge after Trump and he's going to take the GOP in a more radical direction. It's more likely that once Trump's gone and then they determine that Trumpism was the problem, that they go in a more moderate direction that's going to be pleasing to Eric Erickson. So our political fortunes, whether you like it or not, are tied to Trump. Or at least on a electoral or a normal political level. So that is my thoughts on that. What do you make of the musings of Mark Mitchell, Rasmussen, Rich Barris, and Robert Barnes? I used to follow them a lot, but they've been half hair on fire dooming for the past few months. Not sure if you've commented on them, if you follow them at all. I think a lot of them are upset that they're not getting paid by Trump World, and that's reflected in their tweets. I see that with a lot of people because they were all. Barris was extremely pro-Trump in the 2024 primary, and now he's there and. I think it's upset that they're not getting that Trump World is paying other people for polling and other things, and so I think that's why they're really upset. Barris is I don't follow Barnes, but I follow Barris and Mitchell. Mitchell's just kind of a goober. I think he's less annoying than Barris is just because Barris is like always insulting people and attacking people. And just going off, and a lot of their polling, the thing about especially with Barris is that if the Trump world wants to see better polling from him, all they have to do is just pay him. I know a lot of candidates who went to Barris and they showed them results that they wanted, but it wasn't accurate. I mean, I guess sometimes they're accurate in their polling, but it's not usually the best standard to use. And a lot of these guys, whoever pays them, they'll show them the polls they want. Barnes isn't a pollster. I don't know what Barnes. I guess Barnes probably had something he wanted to get paid by Trump World, and it didn't. So that's really my thoughts on it. But I mean, it's all right wing influencers. Everyone. Another reason that people are more into this is because, unlike in the 2010s, where there was no money to be made and not much of an audience to be had with being anti-Trump, there's a lot more money and an audience to be had by being anti-Trump. And a lot of these guys are pissed that they're not getting their expected rewards for being pro-Trump, which maybe that's a problem. I don't know. I don't know what they were wanting, but that's my suspicion for why they're so anti-Trump. And now they can get a whole new audience and a lot more engagement and get higher Twitter payouts. And also, and also there's not much of a punishment for these guys. Like I don't know if Barnes is excluded, but Mitchell and Barris are still invited on Trump World shows, and a lot of influencers still interact with them, so they've not been barred from it. It's like similar to people who speculate about Charlie Kirk's death still getting invited to TPUSA events. So there's no real way to police them, and so they gain an audience, they gain a lot of attention and stuff, and I think it's a lot of lashing out as they think that the more they'll attack Trump, that the more that they'll finally get what they want from Trump World. But that's like a bad commentary. Once again, it's not like these guys are really not in a good position if Trump goes, because Rasmussen's been around for a while, but mainstream conservatives who would take over the party from Trump are absolutely going to have zero to do with these guys. So their political fortunes are, to say what the last questions are, 100% tied to Trump. So I don't think there's another Republican or conservative that's going to be as supportive of them. Myopic Eeyore had a question. He said, I enjoyed the episode on The Nation of Islam. Would you ever do an IQ summit on Tom Wolfe? Absolutely. Probably Bound for the Vanities and the movie I'd probably do. So I would definitely do something on Tom Wolfe. And then Tiberium fan has a question. He said, I know you've beaten this topic to death, but I got pizza with my neighbor. That's all. Well, he's expressing his thoughts. And he said, I would say this is a medium Trump supporter who told me that he had heard Trump was groping underage girls at Epstein's house, etc., and that he now feels ashamed to have supported Trump. I was worried that this would indicate a larger trend among voters going into the midterms, but then I remembered that he wasn't registered to vote until I made him register last year. The question is, could any negative impacts from the Epstein files and other important issues to the Rumble sphere be sidestepped by the fact that most of them don't vote to begin with? Yeah, but you need those voters. Like these low propensity voters, the people who are like getting their news from TikTok, that was a huge part of Trump's coalition. And if they're all think that Trump is a pedophile, that's going to be a problem because we don't have high propensity voters to replace them with. A lot of those, we used to have a lock on high propensity voters, thus midterms and special elections went our way. But it's now shifted or reversed to where the Democrats have a lock on those voters. So that's a problem if these people think that Trump is a pedophile, because these were an essential part of the coalition. And the fact that conspiratorial populism is an anti-establishment feeling are probably the best indicators of their politics. If they're anti-Trump, that's a problem because they're not going to show up. And we need those people to show up, even if they're not wanting to vote Democrat. Normie voters are into this, as I have like relatives who sometimes vote Republican, but they'll think about voting Democrat. So they're like very independent voters, and they're not prone to conspiracy theories. They just hear what they hear on the news, and they also think that Trump like abused young girls based on what they've misheard about Epstein. So I don't think it's going to be a major issue in the elections, but it's an issue for groups that we needed to turn out with, under 30 men. That lock we thought we were going to have for a generation is, I think, it's no longer a lock. Those guys are just not going to show up to vote or vote Democrat. Most likely they're not going to show up to vote. So that's going to be a problem in the midterms, that we don't have replacement voters. Meanwhile, Democrats are going to get their people who out to vote, and that's going to be an issue for us. So that's my take on that. I don't know what to do long term about that, but we will figure that out over time. So I think we're now down just to LK Rurik. His question is, Trump gemmed a little too close to the sun on Truth Social last week. I remember a lot of times when the far right makes blatant racial caricatures, more moderate types said the left were the real racists for thinking that drawing of a man carrying a bag of gold coins with curly hair and a huge nose was meant to be a slight against Jews. In some instances, is this simple dishonesty or low IQ? No, it's more likely low IQ. I think for the one thing I've always made a point is that liberals are obsessed with dog whistles. That like, oh, when they do something secretly racist, they actually hear this. And I remember this back in like when Trump's first run. I remember when he had a Star of David thing on something that Hillary Clinton did, and they said that's a sheriff star, but that stuff doesn't even register with his voters. Like the dog whistle, our voters don't hear that. Like when you talk about bad schools, bad neighborhoods, they literally think it's bad schools, bad neighborhoods, and then when you say it's racial, and it's like, no, it's not. There's nothing racial about it. And I think even with the monkey thing, a lot of them would pretend that there's nothing racial about it because there's like it's a Lion King. I think that I mean, Dinesh D'Souza, I think. I think that was dishonesty, but I think a lot of his followers, I think it's genuine. They're like, what's racist about them being portrayed as gorillas? For a lot of our voters, it's not dishonesty, it's genuine belief. They don't actually hear the dog whistles. The only people who hear the dog whistles are like online right wingers. Dog whistling as a concept, I think I think at times in the 60s and 70s when the sentiments were still very prevalent in our society, they would still have that would still matter, but it's not really mattered since then. And most of the dog whistles are complete bullshit that people wouldn't pick up. Like the dog whistle around Willie Horton was the fact that the camera lingered longer on the black prisoner in the clip. That's racist. This isn't registering with other voters, or even the infamous white hands clip that Jesse Helms put out against his Democratic opponent, which we'll cover in our IQ supplement on Jesse Helms. They'll be out sometime this spring. I don't think the average voter is like, this is white solidarity, even in that day. But today, like, nobody gets this dog whistling. And the most prominent example I saw was in Tennessee election there between Bob Corker and Harold Ford Jr., Harold Ford is now a Fox News commentator. And he was a very moderate Democrat. He actually ran to Corker's right on immigration. But anyway, there was an ad. He one time partied at the Playboy Mansion. And there was this kind of goofy ad where they had all the silliness around Harold Ford. And one of the things they reference is him partying with the Playboy, the Playmates. And one of these girls, who's supposed to be standing for it, and she's white, blonde hair, and she's like, Harold, call me. And the whole news media erupted about how this is the most racist ad they've ever seen, that this is like a hearkening back to like George Wallace. And as someone who lived in Tennessee at the time, that did not register as like, this is racism. This is like severe racism. As that it's this black feller is having sex with her beautiful Playboy girls. We can't allow that. No, that didn't register. It was just simply that this guy is focused on partying and hanging out with women rather than like politics. Didn't even register at that time. So this is 20 years ago. This is 2006. So now this stuff doesn't register as all. So I don't think it's actually honest when they say like, I don't see any racism here. Other things they just don't pick up on. So I always am a strong disbeliever in the dog whistling theory. But that is it for Highly Respected today. We're going to have more great content coming up this week, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.